Yate she LKing and Shiedo Aro don na enschlenigi yakilichit in Schlido na nicht ebashes chin a hat so che chenaligi ya adosh net akut ya the nenschle do hastkatina ba na ki ish na hekat. Hello, my name is LKing. I'm 62 years old, and I've been uh, involved with this grassroots organization about uranium issues, addressing uranium issues and uranium legacy because I live in the midst of uranium, abandoned uranium mines, the tailing spills of July 16, 1979, which abuts my grazing area on the east side and on the south side. And then on the west side, we have an abandoned uranium mining, which through one of our surveys back in 2003 indicated there's a high level of radiation according according to the survey. Back then, it indicated that it was 10 times above the EPA allowable limit. Since then, there has been no resampling, resurveys done, so I don't know what the readings are. I was employed with the UNC from October 1975 to April of 1983. The first year I worked as a surface laborer, where I worked in the change room. They call it the change room, where the workers change from their street clothes to their work clothes to go underground, and the workers coming off shift and getting back into their street clothes to go home. And that area was what I had to do was sweep the whole building inside. So of course I was exposed to uranium dust. It was very dusty by the time all the personnel were out of the building, and I had to do my job. And then after that, I transferred to the geology department as an underground surveyor. An underground prober. After the miners had blasted the tunnels and all the ore pile was stockpile, I had a Geiger counter stick the probe into the stockpile and flagged it according to the grade, what the reading came off of the Geiger counter. Based on those flaggings, that's how the miners, the truck drivers, and the loader operators shipped those to different locations, or when they were called for to bring up these different grades. So that's how they were separated underground and eventually shipped to the top. So I did that for another year. And then after that, so on the third year, I transferred to the engineering department as an underground surveyor. And what I did was I surveyed the tunnels, the drifts, and all that information was uh, copied and had the draftspeople up on the surface um, update the mine maps according to my surveys, the angles and the measurements. So that's how the mapping was updated. When I was underground working as a surveyor, I would be right behind the miners, and so that I always say I got the same dosage of all this contaminants that the miners were inhaling and breathing in and getting on the. I had the same dosage. It was the same because I was right behind them. When they blast, I go in there and do all the measurements, and there was diesel smokes, all the dust coming from the drifts, and all the when they blast, you could smell that all that the smell from the dynamite smell going down the drift, and you smell it. And so I always used to think, I don't. But a job was a job at that time. It was paying good, so I just in back of my mind, I said I need a better job. On that certain day, July 16th, 1979, was not the only time that the Perker wash had seen this contaminant flow through that wash. I said it started earlier in the early 60s because there was mine water flowing through there. all the blasting that they did, all that water uh, mixed in with the water that was flowing into the bottom of the shaft, that was pumped up to the surface, and it wasn't treated, and eventually released into the unnamed wash. The unnamed wash flowed through uh, mill, uh, the mill site and into the Perco wash, and on through the Perco wash goes through the center of Gallup, New Mexico, on down to the Arizona border into the several Navajo communities. There's Manuelito community, there's Lupton community in Arizona, Houck community, and into Sanders, Arizona, uh, into Winslow. So, so all this contaminants was flowing for several years up to about 1995 when the mine finally shut off the pump and the water stopped flowing in the Perco wash. Since the tailing ponds were built with no liners by UNC, and according to our consultant from Albuquerque, UNC kind of surged ahead without and built the tailings pond without getting a permit. The permit came later, and in the first place, the geology formation of the area was already a bad area to build a tailings pond because of the shale, the rock formation underground, below the surface. The tailings ponds were built with no liners. All that seepage, uh, all that contaminations, the byproducts from the mill site were drained into these cells, and all that contamination was seeping into the ground, and that's why the aquifer was created below the tailings pond, and it was somewhere about 100 feet below surface, and so I was measuring the water depth every week, and then about every 2 weeks I was taking a water sample because, of course, like I said, I found out later that it was contaminated. When I was working as the underground surveyor, there was one day I was called out. My supervisor told me to stay on surface, don't go underground. We need to go over to the mill site. You could see a lot of people from the higher ups. I understand there were people from the New Mexico Environment Department. At that time, it was a different. The title was different. But my supervisor wandered off and started talking to other people. So I started looking around too on the dike there, and I noticed huge cracks, and they were big enough to put my hand in there. The cracks were about that wide, and when you look down, it was pitch black. So I knew that those cracks were way down, and in several places. And so I just wandered around. My supervisor was talking to other people and his higher ups, and after several minutes, we just got back into the vehicle. He said, "Let's go back," and we went back to the office at the mine site, and that was that. Kind of heard from my department that the dam had broken. I said, "Wow, where?" And so after I got off shift and I was driving by and I looked in that direction, and it was in the same area where I saw those huge cracks, and there was a huge gaping hole, and so I just looked that way and I just continued, and I over 94 million gallons of radioactive and toxic water that was released, and I've seen I I kind of remember an image in my head after the next day when I drove by there, where it in the wash where the highway that goes up to the mine site. There's a portion right by my house where it crosses, and I look into the riverbed and huge sludge, and it was a catastrophe through that wash. There was never any major cleanup done. I've seen pictures a couple of pictures that I have on my phone on my website where people are actually doing the cleanup, but what they're doing is scooping up the sludge that was left behind after all that water flowed down the wash. Sludge. Scooping them into 5-gallon drums or buckets and eventually depositing them somewhere. From what I heard later, they were then deposited into larger drums and transported off the site. The picture shows workers, and their protective gears are just the rubber boots and shovels. And yet they're standing in this toxic waste that was left behind. And I could just imagine how many people were exposed in some of these and then all the people that live along the riverbed, innocent people that had nothing to do with the mine. How many people got exposed to all this toxic waste that was left behind? Yeah, so after the results from the Crump survey back in the early part of 2000, and when it was discovered that how highly contaminated Redwater Pond community was, that's when they formed an association in 2007, and through the meetings and planning, that's when the community decided to start a commemoration march annually to keep EPA informed that there are people still living out there and in the middle of a waste pile, to remind them that they need to do something. So that has been going on, and that there's a catastrophe up there still sitting there. And that's where the commemoration march started. And over time, we had a lot of people come in. Last year, since being the 40th year of the spill, we had several people from out of the country. We had people from Japan and other people from the European countries, but we had a huge turnout for the commemoration. We need to keep the community and officials and other people that there are still that our state of New Mexico is being looked at as a nuclear dumping ground, because last year, I believe it was, there was another information that we found out about where the spent rods from nuclear plants from California they were proposing to ship on I-40 through the city of Gallup into Albuquerque. There's a lot of uranium that came out of New Mexico, went to these nuclear plants. They used it, and now it's at their term life, and now they want to dump all of that waste back, put it back in New Mexico. Issues like that, we need to keep the public informed that we're not a dumping ground. We need to address these uranium legacy, and all these other industries that are trying to dump their waste, trying to get rid of their waste somewhere, and they're looking at our state again. And we need to keep telling people, keep people aware of what's going on, and we need to stand up to these industries and say no more. We need to keep them out. You wanted it, you used it, you do something with it yourself. So we need to keep the public informed in that way.